On the evening of the 8th of May, 1664, a 25-year-old king of France rode into a garden dressed as a knight from a fantasy novel, his armor gilded, his horse caparisoned in hammered silver, his lance tipped with a ribbon that was not, pointedly, his wife's. The garden was Versailles. It was not yet a palace. It was still, mostly, a building site. 300 acres of drained swamp and ancient scrub that Louis's father had loved as a hunting retreat. André Le Nôtre had been reshaping it for 3 years, wrestling drainage ditches into geometrical canals, planting linden alleys where wild boar had recently roamed. The fountains worked, mostly. The stone was not fully dressed. But Louis wanted a party, and Louis XIV did not throw modest parties. He called it Les Plaisirs de l'Île Enchantée, the pleasures of the enchanted isle. 6 days. 600 courtiers. Justs, ballets, fireworks, and feasts laid on tables that stretched the length of a city block. The official reason was to honor his mother, and of Austria, and his queen, Marie Therese. The unofficial reason stood nearby in the crowd, wearing blue silk, Louise de la Vallière, 20 years old, the king's mistress, for whom the whole extravagant machinery had been wound up and set running. On the third evening, a theatre company performed a new play. The author was a 41-year-old actor-playwright named Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, who went by Molière. The play was Tartuffe, a savage comedy about a religious hypocrite who bilks a noble family out of everything it owns. The Archbishop of Paris immediately demanded it suppressed. Louis let it be performed anyway. He had his own complicated feelings about hypocrites in high places. Jean-Baptiste Lully's music filled the night air. Fireworks transformed the unfinished château into a silhouette of fire. But the deeper spectacle was the courtiers themselves, dukes, princes, marshals of France, each one spending money they did not have to wear clothes they could not afford, to bow before a king who was watching every single one of them. The festival was entertainment. It was also a census. Louis XIV would spend the next 3 decades finishing what that party had started. Not just the palace, the system. A court where the greatest lords in France competed for the honor of handing the king his shirt each morning, where power flowed not from your ancestral estates or your private armies but from how close you stood to the candle. Versailles was not a building. It was a trap. And the bait was gorgeous. Strip away the gilded armor and the fireworks and what remains is this: a king who understood that the most dangerous men in France were the ones with their own armies and their own loyalty networks, and who invented a more elegant solution than war. He built a garden and filled it with bait. The nobles who came for the party stayed for the hierarchy, and the hierarchy required proximity, and proximity required expenditure, and expenditure meant selling the ancestral lands. By the time Versailles was finished, the greatest lords in France had voluntarily dissolved their own power, not at gunpoint, but in pursuit of the honor of holding a candle. 1 festival. 3 decades of consequences. The trap was architectural. The bait was beauty. What strikes us isn't the cynicism, it's the aesthetics. Louis didn't build a prison, he built the most beautiful prison in Europe and made the inmates compete for the best cells. We find that harder to dismiss than a straightforward power grab, because a straightforward power grab you can at least recognize and resist. This, you had to want to enter. Which is what makes us uncomfortable about our own moment, because every era has its Versailles, its system that looks like an opportunity and functions like a census. The question we keep not quite answering is, if you're already inside one, would you know?